All right. Shalom, shalom. We are here again, and we are going into the curse of starting over every generation: identity, land, inheritance, and legacy. This is a heavy one, and I'm honored to be able to touch on this subject. So, today we were supposed to have Dr. Williams with us. He was not able to join us. So, as we open this today, tonight we are dealing with a hard matter: the curse of starting over every generation. Can you imagine that? Having to start over every generation? Or is it so normal that you don't have to imagine it? It's a way of life that we don't even quantify as being different from everybody else. The curse of starting over every generation. When we hear inheritance, most of us think about monetary, but inheritance is way deeper than money. Inheritance is your name, it's your memory. Inheritance is the land. Inheritance is law. Inheritance is household order. Inheritance is many, many other things. It is wisdom your children are trained to carry after you're gone. So Deuteronomy said, "We will become a byword and a proverb." Proverb. A byword is what people call you after your true name is buried. So tonight, what we're doing, we're digging under the name they gave us, under the image they painted, under the land they stripped, and under the household that fractured, and under the paperwork that still scatters our inheritance. Starting over every generation is not a normal thing. It is the mark of a people whose identity, land, records, household, and inheritance have been attacked, and whose duty now is to rebuild in order. So Deuteronomy 28 and 37 says this: "And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whether the Lord shall lead thee." So this conversation is not solely on money. Of course, finances is extremely important, and I think we should do an episode on finances. But this is more like a covenant with land, identity, memory, and household order conversation. So the first inheritance is not money; it is identity. A people must know who they are before they can know what they are responsible to preserve, right? That makes a big difference. When we look at other nations, when we look at other nations outside of ourselves, we are able to see that in play. We're able to see that within each community, they have heritage, they have traditions, and things that they continue that act as the borders and the parameters for what they are doing. If I do not know my people, then how do I know what I'm attached to? How, I do not feel their land loss as my concern. If I do not know my covenant story, I do not see the commandments as my household instruction. And if I do not know the name, I inherit a label. If I do not know the fathers, I inherit a blank page. So identity creates duty. When I know these are my people and their land loss is not just their issue, their inheritance is my concern as well. So um, we're going to look at some research and some scripts on some things and some data. So just to ask you all some questions here, when you think about inheritance, what is the first thing that comes in mind? When you think about inheritance, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Boom. So we got it in there. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind? I want if I can get some interaction here, right? And what I'm looking for is what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Don't think it. Don't overthink it. I want you to stay true to what you think of, right? Um, Also, like and share the video, so others will be able to tap in and we can get some more interaction, right? So I'll go first. The first thing I think of when I think of inheritance, I'm not going to lie, I think of what my parents will pass me when they die, right? Whether that is house or whether that is money. That is what I naturally first think of, right? But that is not all of it. I'm not saying that's all of it, but that is what comes to my mind. Okay. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds here. All right. Land, money, house. Facts. That's what I think of. That's the same thing I think of. I think of land, money, and house. That's what comes to my mind. Right. So also too, I want to put this in the chat, and I'll put this in the chat throughout. Anybody want to join the live stream and chime in? You don't have to stay on stage. I would prefer for you to be able to share your video so that we can see your face. But if you cannot, it is not a contingency for you being able to come on and share your thoughts. All right. So most people say money. Some will say land. Very few will say name, memory, covenant, or household order. And this is the question here. When you think about inheritance, what is the first thing that comes to mind? When you think about inheritance, what is the first thing that comes to mind? You can add it in the chat. So that tells us exactly where the damage is. If a people only think inheritance is money, they will only grieve the money. They will not grieve the name that was buried, the land that was taken, or the records that was scattered. Tonight, we're going to dive deeper than money, and we're going to the root of it. So family and memory is not nostalgia. Family memory is a map. Also, too, when we think about when we think about the scriptures, the Revelations 2:9, Revelations 3:9, he says, "I know the poverty. I know your poverty, but you are rich." So the richness that he's talking about is deeper than money. So yeah, we can have poverty, but we also can have something that is deeper than that. So family memory is not nostalgia. Family memory is a map. Research has connected knowledge of family history with strong self-esteem, stronger family function, lower anxiety, fewer behavior problems, and a stronger internal sense of control. So that matches the Torah, and our children were not merely supposed to inherit possessions, they were supposed to inherit a testimony. Their fathers were to teach the children what happened and what the Most High commanded, how the people were delivered, why the land mattered, and what obedience required. A child who does not know the family story inherits a last name with no map. So here's some data to add to this, right? And we're going to go. This lesson has legs, so stick around. There's different channels that we're going to go through that are going to really show you some things. So data for Pew found that 76% of Black Americans have spoken with relatives to learn about family memory, family history. So Pew also found that 40% of Black adults under 30 were not sure whether their ancestors were enslaved. That is huge. So the younger generation can be close to culture, but far from ancestral memory, and that is a dangerous for inheritance. Why do you all think that it's important for them to understand history? Why do you all think it's important for the younger generation to understand history? My answer would be my answer would be because everything is history, right? Your name is history. Your birth date is history. People, when they lose history, they call it amnesia. That's what they call it. They call it amnesia, right? And as a people, we have suffered from amnesia. We forget, right? Enough time goes about. You get so caught up in working and all of these things. Totally understand, and we get caught with amnesia. But if you're not anchored to the root of how can the fruit even survive if you don't have the fruit? Absolutely. T. Matt says so they don't create the same mistakes. Absolutely. If you don't understand your history, then you're bound to repeat what you've done before in the past. So I'm gonna leave that question up there. So, did your parents or grandparents tell you stories about your family? Did your parents or grandparents tell you stories about your family? Where you came from, what you went through, what land or country the family came from? And that's a yes or no. Yes or no. Let me know in the chat. So T Matt said no. Brianna said yes. On one side of my family. Um, while I'm going on with this, I would love for you to expound on that a little bit if you can. Brianna. T Matt said no, right? I would say my answer is a little bit. And Brianna says as much as they knew, anyhow. Yeah, I would agree. I would say that I got told a little bit, and it was only from one person, and that was my grandfather. On one person, maybe once or twice, right? And that is how I learned some things about our family. But when our elders die, they take an entire body of knowledge with them. They take an entire library with them, right? And if we don't get it, then we just don't get it. All right. So look at how many people said no. I would say, and how many people said somewhat, right? Or for me, I said I wish I asked pretty much before it was too late. The story that was never told is one of the most expensive silences in our community. When elders do not tell it and children do not ask it, the family has to start the story from scratch every generation. That's one aspect of the curse of starting over every generation, right? Our history, even our family history, is not being passed down for many of us. Ice U Cole said I had a bit of both, and I would love to hear y'all's story. Like, if you can expound a little bit, um, and it's okay if it comes too late. I'll pivot. I'll show you. I'll show you the respect of the time that you took to write it. For anybody in the chat, for the time that you or for these questions that I'm posing, if you can expound a little bit, um, I would love to hear it. All right. So, and I, like I said, I'll just pivot back around. So, when there's no memory or testimony, it's just the last name and a blank page. So, culture is not so much decoration. Culture is capital when it teaches children how to survive, navigate, resist, build, speak, remember, and belong. All right. Brianna said, I had a little to no history of my dad's side. My mom's side is pretty good about communicating history. When I started digging on my dad's side, I realized it was intentional for some. Whoa, that's pretty. And when you say intentional for some, do you mean it was intentional for some not to share the history? Or do you mean it was intention? I'm supposing that's what you mean, just for a little bit of clarity for myself and for the audience as well. They didn't want the history told. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. Aisha Cole said, my grandfather, right, right. My grandfather on my mom's side tried to give me a little. My dad's side, my pops was intentional about getting the info from my great grandma, Gma, about the history. So we have some people who share it, and their scope may be very limited, and some people withhold it on purpose. And we understand that, those dark parts don't want to be shared, and that's what I infer from it, is that there is a dark side of things that we don't want to relive. Like for instance, for my family, I didn't even know my dad was adopted until I was about 30 years old. He never told me. I never had a clue. We grew up around people that I call my aunt and my uncle, and still I had no idea these people were not my blood relatives. No clue until I was about 30. And when I was about my mid 20s or so, I found out my dad had a brother. I was waiting tables, and the man would come in, and I had no clue this man was my dad's brother the entire time. How I found out, I honestly don't remember. I met him a couple of times, and that was pretty much it. And Brianna said, yes, exactly. Intentional not to share. And Aishu Cole said, I spent a lot of time sitting at the feet of the elders, though. They love telling story. It's what made me understand the relevance of Deuteronomy 32:7. I like to look and see what it say, because I'm like that for real. Deuteronomy 32:7 says, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. That is wisdom. That is wisdom. That is wisdom that I got at a much later age. I would say that my grandfather had already passed, because he was the one who told me the tidbits that I could know, right? About family history. And those times just came because I was hanging around him at the time. And so he talked, you know what I'm saying? So it was certain things that he just kind of elaborated on, but I didn't have the wisdom to ask those questions. I wish I would have. So, looking at culture as wealth when it teaches children how to stand. So culture is not a decoration. Culture is capital when it teaches children how to survive, navigate, resist, build, speak, remember, and belong. But culture becomes poverty when it teaches only consumption, performance, image, and entertainment. If the culture teaches children how to spend, but not how to preserve, how to dance, but not how to discipline themselves, how to perform, but not how to govern the household, then the culture becomes part of the leak. Culture is wealth when it teaches children how to stand. Culture becomes poverty when it teaches children only how to consume. Brianna said, just to pivot back here, because I know there's a delay as I'm talking, right? She said, same. I found out my maternal grandfather wasn't my biological grandfather when my biological grandfather died. Wow. My mom and grandma dropped it on me like they were telling me the time, no big deal. LOL. Right. I think so many things are triggers and cognitive dissonance that I think cognitive dissonance has a huge play on that. And maybe we should do an episode on that, right? Cognitive dissonance, because there's so many people that that distance themselves from a true reality in order to escape the hurt. And that's why unraveling the onion, the reason why it's so big for me, is because, and I forgot, to do like trigger warnings at the beginning, is that if you are triggered by something, then fantastic. What that tells us is that there's a part of you that needs to be healed, and it's okay, right? We don't want to continue to push you past where you're willing to go, but I think being triggered tells us something. T Matt Vision said, I just knew about my grandfather telling me about going to World War II and grandma telling me about the Great Depression. Wow. Yeah. And you know what? My grandfather actually, because the only grandfather that I had any relationship with was on my mother's side. And it wasn't a bad relationship, but it wasn't a tight relationship either. And I remember him talking about World War II too. Um, and Brianna said it wasn't a secret per se, just one of those things no one talked about. Right. And T Matt said, same, same. So we got a lot of common threads here. We got a lot of common threads, and we're going to be able to unpack a lot of it as well. Aishu Cole said, triggers tell us that part of us needs to be healed. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what it's telling us. That's what it's telling us. A part of it needs to be healed, but oftentimes we suppress it and we turn the other way. And that is the equivalent of leaving waste in your body and never using the bathroom. Imagine if you had feces, fecal matter built up in your body and you never got rid of it and you lived your life, right? Now, physically, we can't do that. It would kill us. But the thing is, emotionally and with our triggers, it'll do the same thing. It'll just look different in process. And I would say it's even on a deeper level because it affects all of the generations that come behind you. And even by our own testimonies, all of us have a common thread, right? And this common thread is that we see where we're starting over every single time. We're starting over every single time. We're starting from a clean slate, right? So that's major. That's major. So we're actually, in a way, carrying the trauma of our parents because even by their silence, we're carrying it. But when we look in the scriptures, I think when we look at things, I think it's important to share those truths. You don't have to share it when maybe they're little children and they're not ready for it, but it's important to share those truths so that we can map out the mistakes that were made so that we can prevent them from being made in the future. So when we let me see. So this is why identity has to be corrected before inheritance can be rebuilt. So a child cannot preserve what he has been trained to despise. A child cannot multiply what he has been trained only to consume. A child cannot guard the land if nobody taught him the land is holy, responsibility, and family continuity. So supportive networks, spiritual practices, traditions, communications, and knowledge and access to resources. So positive identity messages have been connected with stronger academic outcomes among what we will call African American youth. I'm going to say that again. Positive identity messages have been connected with stronger academic outcomes and even our health. I don't know, y'all can Google this on how our health is connected to who we are, right? When I found out who we are, right, and I began to, I automatically knew that I automatically was able to accept a diet, a way of dieting, a way of eating along with that, because I figured who I am comes equipped with a body of knowledge as well, right? So if you say African American, then what is the body of knowledge that comes with that? Because that really stops at a 400-year mark. And for many of us, it stops even prior to that, even from the conversation that we're having. All right. So the identity was altered before the inheritance was attacked. Now, the deeper layer, right? And we're going to get ready to go into some deeper things. If the oppressor can make the captive believe the book belongs to someone else, Then the captive will read inheritance laws and land laws, household laws, Sabbath laws, and covenant warnings as if they are somebody else's family record. So that is a byword and a proverb condition of people living inside the curses while being taught to read themselves out of text. If Deuteronomy describes a people scattered, oppressed, carried into bondage, renamed, mocked, stripped of land, made a byword among the nations, and the same people are taught this book is not about you, then that is the deepest form of disposition. Before the land was taken, the image was distorted. Before the records were lost, the memory was attacked. Before the children started from zero, the people were taught to forget who they were. So with that being said, and all praise to the Most High, Yuko, I appreciate it. With that being said, let's take a look at and dive back into some history and look at this.
Got out of it. Why did they do it?
Motive, I guess, satisfaction is all I can figure it out. I don't know what it was.
Satisfaction.
I reckon that was it.
This is a clip from a 60 Minutes report that aired on December 11th, 1983, hosted by Ed Bradley. It's one of the first times the story of the Rosewood Massacre was ever brought to a national audience. In this clip, Fred Kirkland talks about what he saw as the mob grew into the thousands at Rosewood. He was a teenager when he watched the mob massacre the black residents of the town. With law enforcement gone, there was nothing standing between that mob and the people of Rosewood.
They went wild. There was 1,000 to 1,500 people there by that time when they're coming in from every direction. And it was crazy. They give the high sheriff and the deputies 5 minutes to get out of sight and not come back.
They told the sheriff and the deputy to get out of town and not come back?
Get out of there. Give them 5 minutes to get out of sight.
And what did the sheriff and the deputy do?
They left there. And then they went to burning houses, killing people you never seen.
Yeah, Sunday morning they came through here, setting houses on fire. And as each one ran out, they'd shoot them, kill them. And there was a colored woman right here, lived just across here in the woods from me. And her name was Lexi Gordon. And she was sick. She had typhoid fever. And when she told the ones that was staying there with her for them to go ahead and get away if they could, well, she'd just take whatever come, Well, naturally, when they set the house afire, well, she ran out towards the back. And she had a back door, Johnny, out there, and so she made for it. And they shot her before she got there.
But she had nothing to do with
it at all, whatever. And, it was the way with a lot of them, you see. That's the reason it was such a situation that we just couldn't understand. It was just a mad bunch of men come in here.
State of Oklahoma to acknowledge that.
The Tulsa Race Massacre is believed to be one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. From May 31st to June 1st in 1921, as many as 300 people were killed, hundreds were injured, and thousands of buildings were destroyed.
On June 1st, they began to systematically destroy neighborhoods, and they had airplanes dropping things down on people's houses, and they had made up their minds to clear the entire area of black people.
It started after a newspaper reported a black man tried to sexually assault a white woman. Though it's still uncertain what exactly happened, many did not believe that story. The Oklahoma Historical Society said the most common explanation is Dick Rollins stepped on Sarah Page's foot when he entered the elevator, causing her to scream. A group of armed black men went to the courthouse to offer help protecting Rowland once they heard talks of lynching. A crowd of white men was also on the scene. A shot was fired and the riots began.
My parents were very distressed because here they are with 5 kids, And the schools have been. I went to Dunbar School, and that was reduced to just rubble. I mean, they blew it up.
Crowds of white rioters went to the Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street. It was home to an affluent African-American community with banks, hotels, theaters, and new homes.
They took my 8-year-old brother, too, where they were holding all the black men. And we didn't know, because we lived on one side of town and they lived on the other. We thought they were locking up the non-blacks too. But it so happened that it didn't occur that way. What they did was to disarm and lock up all black men. And then they said to the mob, there's nothing out there now but women and children, so you can do whatever you want to do. And that was when the real terrible things started to happen.
It ended when the city was placed under martial law and National Guard troops were deployed. But Black Wall Street was devastated. Survivors never received compensation for what they lost.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this...
So when you all see that, what, and I know this is familiar history, and we're going to touch a little bit more history as well. You know, and I'm sure that you all are familiar with it, but it's a story that we cannot, absolutely positively cannot allow to die. And I would say that it is not the responsibility of media outlets. It is the responsibility of us to make sure that these stories are told to our children. Stories of these massacres, even stories of eugenics that have been plotted and done as a way to systemically oppress us and depopulize us as well. So I think that these are very important story. And so what feelings are invoked when you see these clips? So I'd like to know from you all. And as I know, like I said, this is a familiar history. I'm pretty sure this is a history that we know. But when we bring witness in, then we understand that these events are not random. So this is a covenant language. Deuteronomy 28 does not only describe poverty, it describes a people under judgment whose children, land, labor, identity, movement, and inheritance are touched. So when we look at Rosewood, and we look at Tulsa, when we look at East St. Louis and Black farmland loss, and even things that go on today, because Black farmers are also fighting to keep their land, right? Over political ways, over highways being driven through the middle of their lands to make sure that they are displaced and dispersed. So Brianna says, what's always got me was the silence. If my grandparents and others their age told the stories about what happened to them, then there's another side to that. Absolutely. And it's important that we give this to our children. It's important that we give this and we link this history to our children down to the very root of things. All right. So what we're looking at here is a covenant consequence showing up in the land of captivity. We have so many scriptures, right? And I have to bring out the scriptures, because just as I'm highlighting this history, I also must highlight that the scriptures are a history taught by our ancestors that we reflect, right? Projecting to the future or prophesying to the future, so that we will be able to identify ourselves, knowing that we would be lost. So Deuteronomy 28:15, it says, but all of these curses will come over you and overtake you if you do not hearken to the voice of the Lord. And I paraphrase. Verse 16 says, cursed shall thou be in the city, and cursed shall thou be in the field. We were cursed in the fields, right? Picking the cotton and handling things within the field. And then once we go into the city, the trouble follows us, right? We begin to grow like Rosewood and like Tulsa, like East St. Louis, right? And like all of these other places that have happened throughout time, because we have to understand this has happened many times throughout history. So verse 17 says, the basket in the store, cursed shall thou basket in the store. So our finances, right? Our inheritance. And verse 18 says, the children in the land and increase. Cursed shall be the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, showing that it is something that happens throughout generation to generation, right? This is undeniable. One can say something about, one would be able to say something about anything else, but this is undeniable. And this is why I'm able to, no matter what race, color, creed of people I'm able to talk to, I'm able to anchor down the truth of what is highlighted in the scriptures through showing our condition. I was once at the place where I had a hard time believing, but once I saw myself anchored, I couldn't deny it. Verse 19 says, the coming in and coming out. Cursed shall thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shall thou be when thou goest out, showing generation. Verse 29 says, thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee. Right? Verse 30, thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell in it. And we look at what we built. We built this country. We built the White House, and we built all of these other places. And yet we're not able to enjoy the benefit truly of that labor, right? So cursed in the city is Tulsa, cursed in the field is farmland loss, and cursed in the basket and store is economic instability. Cursed in the fruit of thy body is children inheriting trauma instead of order. And I'm gonna put that last question that I put up there. When you see these clips, what kind of feelings do they invoke? What kind of thoughts do they invoke in you? Okay, building houses and not dwelling in them is rosewood. Labor consumed by another nation is the inheritance gap. Byword and proverb is identity distortion. Ships is the diaspora, which we see in verse 68. When you jump down to verse 68, it says, the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. When you go to Exodus 20:2, it tells you Egypt means the house of bondage. So when it's saying that you will go into Egypt again with ships, this is talking about cargo slave ships. And how was Moses speaking about cargo slave ships going into slavery with ships, and he never experienced such a thing? Not only that, but it does not take cargo, it does not take ships to be able to go into Egypt, right? You don't have to have it, right? When you think about the full landmass of what the true land of Israel is. With that being said, let's go to here.
And organize a mob. That's what they did.
In the spring of 1917, the National Guard was brought in to protect the factory and its workers. But everybody knew this was a town on the verge of a race riot. When violence flared up in May, the Guard was able to keep it under control. But East St. Louis hadn't cooled off. Tensions built, fueled by unsubstantiated press reports of Negro crime waves and gun purchases, and by rumors and inflammatory public speeches.
They wanted to drive the blacks out of East St. Louis. They wanted to make East St. Louis an all-white town.
The evening of Sunday, July 1st, a car drove through a Negro neighborhood firing shots as it drove by. Later, when another car approached, shots were fired from the crowd. Maybe some thought it was the same car, but it wasn't. Police officers were in this one, and 2 were killed. When word of what happened spread, white mobs set out to attack blacks. They beat, shot, lynched, even burned to death. Fires were set in black neighborhoods, and people were shot as they tried to escape the flames. A family just up from Mississippi stepped right into the middle of it.
And just as we got to 10th Street, where we were standing, we could see different people running and hollering, colored people. And they were getting down in the weeds that they were hiding from. And the guy would run and shoot. You didn't know what to shoot. You just see the smoke and hear the shot.
That was a scary time.
The daughter of former Mayor Melbourne Stevens was told to stay indoors, and she watched from her bedroom window.
You could hear cars racing by and people yelling and screaming. And I could see all the fires burning. Where they'd set fire, you know, to the colored houses. I was petrified.
No one will ever know for sure how many people were killed in the East St. Louis race riot of 1917. Some of the early reports were exaggerated. The official death toll was 39 blacks and 9 whites. Others accepted the higher number of 100, almost all black. They searched for bodies, but so many people couldn't be accounted for. Maybe they had crossed the bridge to St. Louis. Maybe their bodies were somewhere in the river. The nation responded with speeches, editorials, and accusations. Some blamed labor, the police, city government, industry for importing blacks. Some said whites had only acted to prevent a black uprising. In the South, many said the race riot exposed Northern hypocrisy and showed what was really awaiting Southern blacks in northern cities.
By the 19-teens, it was the North's turn to decide on the Negro question. And I see East St. Louis as a harbinger of white supremacy, Northern style.
Despite pressures from blacks and whites to condemn the riot, President Wilson made no statement. But Congress investigated the riot, the crimes, and the city of East St. Louis itself. This wasn't a black eye. This was a self-inflicted wound that would leave an ugly scar if it ever healed at all.
So when we take that in and we live vicariously through that time, you know, one of the things that comes to my mind right now is really gratefulness, because if you think about it, we were preserved when we were in the loins of people who were going through this persecution. Had our ancestor, rest his soul, been somebody like a Emmett Till or something like that, that died in their youth, that never had children, and an entire nation would have died with them. And yet we were preserved through that time. We were preserved through the Middle Passage. We were preserved throughout all of the plagues and the evil that befell, and yet we were preserved. That is the immediate thought that comes to my mind when I look at that clip. You can definitely want to hear from you all. What is your immediate thought when you see these? Is it anger? Is it disgust? You know, what is it for you? So I'll type that in the chat. What is your immediate thought after seeing these clips? All right. It's sobering. I would definitely say that. I'm not going to sit here and act like I knew all of it as I'm doing like my journalist work into these topics, because they require a lot of time. They require a lot of insight, foresight on these things. And I can't say that I was fully aware of this one and this other ones as well. These are definitely not the only ones. There are several of them. And every single time that we started to get our legs underneath us to build, they were knocked out from underneath us. So, where our condition is far different, where it's systemic oppression and is backed and supported by the law, right? There's a law that says that this is acceptable, right? And when you put it into law and you put it part of the system, that of the country that you are dwelling in, it makes it a very unique situation. And I think that's why it's important for us to understand why these situations are happening. And it's also important to understand, if you can understand the why, then you can understand. If you can diagnose the why, then you can also understand the solution that should come along with it. So when we look at Rosewood, for example, and they're burning property, that's grandchildren losing a place they were supposed to return to. When people talk about inheritance, they usually think about money, but what happens when the money is gone and the house is burned? What happens when the deed is scattered? You understand? What happens when the elders run for their lives, and what happens when the children inherit fear instead of land? See, there's something deeper that has to be able to anchor us down, something not carnal and something internal, something eternal, right? So when I look at those things, like it's like the difference. I was teaching my kids one time and I was telling them the difference between peace and shalom, right? And people often don't understand the difference between peace and shalom. When we think about Christ, people say, "Oh, he was the Prince of Peace," right? But when people think about peace, they usually think about tranquility. They think about quietness, right? So it's an outside condition and not an inside condition. See, shalom is an inside condition, right? It's a condition of harmony and being anchored to the creator no matter what you go through. That's even if you are ripped down to your undergarments in front of people, and you're whipped, and a crown of thorns, and you're spit upon, and you're misused, right? And you're mistreated, and you're sad. See, this peace that I'm talking about, this level of shalom that I'm talking about, is not contingent upon outside conditions, but it's anchored because of inside conditions. So when I look at this, what I think of is being anchored by something inwardly. So yes, we can have money, and we can have land, and we can have all of these things, right? But at the end of the day, they're still things. And I'm not negating having them. I think having them is vitally important, especially to be able to deal with here on the earth and be able to have some level of leverage and power. I definitely think that is necessary, but it is not as solid of a ground as inheritance is. It's not as solid of a ground as knowing self, because we can see time and time again when they come and knock it down, right? You're building that sand castle, and when the waves hit it, what are you left with? Who are you? What do you stand for? How are you anchored? So Rosewood shows us that inheritance can be intact in one night, but the wound can echo for generations. The children who should have inherited land inherited silence, and the grandchildren who should have had a place to stand inherited a story that many families were too wounded to tell. So Florida later passed the 1994 Rosewood Act, which directed an investigation, compensated former residents, and created a scholarship fund of descendants. The use so this was not only individual violence, it was interrupted inheritance, right? When we look at the St. Louis script, right? When we look at the St. Louis script, the pattern didn't stay in small towns. When our people moved north during the Great Migration, looking for wages in industry and a new start, the violence followed them into the factory city. So this was a northern style of white supremacy. That's what we saw with St. Louis. East St. Louis shows that even when Black people pursued work, housing, and economic footing, advancement itself became a target. So the East St. Louis shows another layer of starting over. Our people left the South looking for work, stability, and a chance to build. But when they entered the industrial economy, they were met with mobs, fire, and terror. So the pattern is not only we had land and they took it, it also we moved for work and they attacked the path to wages. When the people can't safely hold land in the South or safely pursue wages in the North, their children inherit instability from both directions. When we look at the Tulsa, we see the pattern of Rosewood shows land and town inheritance attack, and East St. Louis shows labor and migration attack. Tulsa shows Black prosperity itself attack. And Greenwood was not poverty. Greenwood was proof. It was proof that our people could build homes, businesses, churches, newspapers, schools, doctors, law offices, and community power. And that proof was attacked. So, what did they really destroy in Tulsa? Buildings or inheritance? What did they really destroy in Tulsa? Buildings or inheritance? Says those people, Brianna says those people who did those things didn't disappear. Absolutely. And their children and grandchildren coexist with us. Are they talking about it? Do they tell the stories? Do they acknowledge it? So when I watch these clips, it reminds me that we were not lost, but intentionally misled. The false reality we were taught was carefully crafted. Absolutely. It was carefully crafted. And no, I don't think that they acknowledge it. I think that they practice cognitive dissonance. They practice cognitive dissonance. They distance themselves from it. And because they distance themselves from it, I can't help but to believe and to think that there's a part of them still attached. See, there's a saying that says, you prick the eye, you get some tears. You prick around for the mind, you'll find out knowledge. And I think if you prick around enough, you'll find it. Because when I see they are still advocating for George Washington, right? Thomas Jefferson. These were terrorists to us. So if you say no, I am not a racist, right? If you say no, I don't believe in that, yet you side with the people in history, right? That have this narrative that were horrible for us, but you hold them up as being this great and powerful person. To me, that is problematic. So while I do not hold a level of, I cannot say I hold, I just understand, right? And I understand, and I must speak the truth of it, that if you have that common thread, then indeed you carry a sense of responsibility and accountability to racism, because you're also helping carry the narrative, right? And if we look at that on a scale, right, because I also like to deal with things in principle, then that same thing will go for their grandmother and their great grandmother and their, because it's not that far. We really, if or the grandfather and the great grandfather, if they do not fully repent of those things and say, you know what they did was wrong. What they did was wrong. And I'm sorry for that. If they can't muster that within themselves, then there is no true repentance for the action. And therefore, I will never truly trust you. And that's just me being honest. So interrupted inheritance. Exactly. That's why I can't stand the conversations of your is why Black people can't XYZ. Yes, we can. But people don't know the history. Absolutely. We absolutely can. And I would say that if we leave it only to pointing and looking at the things that cause the disruption, and we constantly say, okay, this is the reason why we can't do XYZ, then we relinquish all of our power. So let me put the question in the chat here. I think I got it here. So give me 1 second. Maybe I can copy and paste it. Sometimes this thing does not allow me to copy and paste. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. And let me see if it'll let me do it. It does. So this is the question. What did they really destroy in Tulsa? Buildings or inheritance? I would like for you all to tell me what you think. Buildings or inheritance? Right? I want to hear from you all first before I give before I chime in with my answer. So while I'm waiting on that from you all, let's continue. So now we've seen the pattern. Rosewood shows land and town inheritance attack. East St. Louis show labor and migration attack. Tulsa shows prosperity, itself attacked. Attack. Greenwood was not poverty. Greenwood was proof. It was proof that our people could build homes, businesses, churches, papers, schools, doctors. All right. So let's continue. Tulsa proves that the issue was never that we could not build. The issue was that when we built, the system treated our building as a threat. And that was a huge problem. Businesses were destroyed, homes were destroyed, records were destroyed, insurance did not restore what was lost, courts did not make the people whole. Children who should have inherited equity inherited ashes, silence, and a warning. Do not build too high. Put a ceiling on yourself. Rosewood burned the place grandchildren were supposed to return to. East St. Louis attacked the wages families were trying to build from. Tulsa burned the proof that we could create an economic world of our own. So here's the next question. When you hear Rosewood, East St. Louis, and Tulsa, do you see isolated events or do you see a pattern of inheritance interruption? When you hear Rosewood, East St. Louis, and Tulsa, do you see isolated events or do you see a pattern of inheritance interruption? And to go back to this question, before we move to that question, my answer would be they interrupted buildings. I would say, inheritance for sure. They interrupted inheritance because inheritance is both physical and identity and what we have in bloodline. I would say the immovable inheritance is who we are. And that comes with customs. It comes with ways of being. And it comes with a sovereign God. You understand? A sovereign God. No matter what, people will be able to look at us. People will be able to look at us and be able to quantify the covenant, right? And I say this loosely, but for the rest of the world, it is the people that makes the Bible a real thing, right? Because when Christ says he is the word flesh, I don't think it's limited to Christ. I think that we are the word flesh as well, because I would have never known who I was if it wasn't for me looking in the book, right? I was free. I was free bouncing around, right? I had no attachment to anything. I wasn't anchored to anything. And it showed in my way of being, right? So just like if you have a child, you tell that child, don't throw dirt, right? They go to the park, they throw dirt, you take that child home, you give them a whooping, right? Let's say they have siblings. Siblings look at that and say, ooh, I don't want to throw dirt at the park. Or you have a child who lies, right? And you bring them in the room, you whoop them, you say, move your hand. And the other kids out the room, they like, ooh, I don't want to lie. Well, if the rest of the world actually knew who we were, they would look at our condition and say, ooh, I don't want to sin. So even in our state of being where we are, they are able to look at our condition. And from our condition, that should be a testimony to them that this God is real, because he took his children into the room and he chastised them. So a parent is going to chastise their children when they love them. And that shows the love of the Most High that he has for us to change us in a different direction. Brianna says both. Those buildings represented something deeper, just like the land that generations are now selling away for a fraction of its worth, ignoring what it meant to their parents and grandparents. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm on a quest now trying to secure some land for myself. And I encourage everybody here and everybody that comes across this video, get land, right? It is not the government's responsibility. It is not HEB's responsibility or Kroger or Food Lion or wherever you may be responsibility to feed you. It is your responsibility to feed yourself. So you should always be self-sustainable. So if the world goes to hell in a handbasket, you should be able to sustain yourself and sustain your family, especially as men. We should be able to provide for our family. Aishu Cole said, I skipped out for a bit, so I missed some of the video, but mostly the internal damage was the most powerful. Buildings can be rebuilt and inheritance can be restarted, but they're showing that when you build, we can and will destroy it. Absolutely. And this is why I say something that is more eternal, like who we are, our being anchored in that will give us something, no matter what, that they will never be able to destroy, because it is the covenant that the Most High has given us. My next question is, when you hear Rosewood, East St. Louis, and Tulsa, do you see isolated events or do you see a pattern of inheritance interruption? So I think we will probably be unanimous on this, that we see a pattern of interruption. We know that it is very much intentional. I'll leave it up there for everybody else. It is very much intentional. And I have a few questions here that I want to throw out in the chat to be able to hear from you all. The next question is, what inheritance did your family lose? I would say the inheritance that we lost was our name. We lost who we were. I think that's so important, because who you are comes with a body of knowledge, right? If we understood who we are, it would change the way we eat. It would change the way we think. It would change the way that we deal with one another, right? It would change our group economics, the way that we deal with money, our protection for one another, right? How we deal politically, it would change. It would change all of those things. So here we go. I'm gonna put a few questions in the chat. T Matt said, naming the resources our inherited land was on. That's big, because whoever controls the resources controls the narrative. When you look in, just for an example, when you look in the book of Exodus, they took the straw away from them and had to make brick themselves. So we can clearly see that the resources can make life very easy for you, or it can make life very hard for you. But the person in power controls the resources. So I'm just giving you all some time, a few moments, to interact in the chat, answer some of these questions for me. Was there land in your family that disappeared? Was there land in your family that disappeared? I would say for me, I don't even know. I don't even know. Yes and no. The only land that I know that got sold that I'm sure I'll never see a piece of was my grandfather's land on my father's side, on my mother's side. Otherwise than that, I have nothing. I have nothing but what I build in this lifetime. We lost safety. That's big. Living in a state of fear holds you back. Children were raised with fear. Decisions were made in fear. That's big. That's big. Yeah. That's like a whole topic of an onion to unravel. And I think that that's what I call blind spots. If you are used to living like in a fear like that, you pass that down to your children. So, like many of us, when you get pulled over by the police, what do they tell you? What do your parents tell you? You get pulled over the police, we all get the set of instructions, right? Some of us even have names so that when we put our names on a resume, that we will appease to the white boss. T Matt says my great grandfather's acres of land that was on top of oil, and they had him killed. Wow. Wow. That's big because it shows that what that communicates is that they feel like they can do whatever they want to. You know what I'm saying? They can do whatever they want to because we don't have any representation. And that's pretty big. And that also ties into what Brianna said about living in fear. Living in fear. So, did your family ever talk about why they left the town, county, farm, or property? Why they left it? Why they had to leave? I would say for me, no. My family has pretty much been in Houston as far as I can trace back, slave trade maybe 400 years. I don't know. It gets blurry, and you're not really told much until a certain time. So can you relate to this one? Even something, you know, at least, I know with our parents, our grandparents, um, they usually stayed together. Now we deal with, and something I'm going to touch here on in a minute, but we deal with split families. With split families, if you don't have a governing system, because the Torah tells us that even for the wife that you hated, that son is to receive the inheritance all the same, that firstborn son, if that wife was the wife that you hated, you didn't like, something happened between you all, you were not to diminish the inheritance of that person. So in today's time, with families being split and there being no rule, right? No code and way of of knowing, a lot of inheritance gets lost because, oh, mom remarried, dad remarried, grandpa remarried, and that inheritance went to that party, and we lost it. We lost it out of our family, right? Because that spouse came along and they took that, right? Here's another question for you. Do you know where your grandparents or great grandparents' land records are? Do you know where their records are? I would say the only ones that I'm aware of from me is they got sold. I think the property got sold, and they split the money, and I'm sure they're gonna spend that, and I'm probably never gonna see a dime of any of that money. T Matt said, nope. Nope. So while the rest of the world is building from generation to generation, we're building on generation one over and over and over again. Aisha Cole said, I got a better chance of finding Bigfoot. Right. I got a better chance of finding Bigfoot. Absolutely. Crazy. So y'all can still answer in the chat, and I'll just circle back around. Yesterday it was mobs. Today it can be probate, tax liens, unclear title, partition sales, development pressure, and one heir selling what generations were supposed to hold. Heir's property is land passed down without clear title, often because there was no will. Let's talk about it. Has anybody here talked to their parents about their will? From what I know, they moved for work and opportunity. That's how we ended up in Acres Home. Acres Home has a deep history. It does. It does have a very deep history. And I'm going to say this. I know it was a black area, but I don't fully know the history. That's something, shame on me. Shit, I should know. I should know the history and get familiar with that history, seeing that's where we are from. So who here has talked to their parents about what to do when they pass and them leaving a will? You can do it here. And if so, what did that conversation look like? And if not, why not? Yeah, you know what? You say you having it both stubborn. You know what? That is so true. Like with black people, I don't know what it is. Because I've had a conversation with one of my parents, not both of them, but I've had a conversation with one, and he told me, told me what was going to happen. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's what also helped inspire this episode. I got some harsh truths. Anybody else here, have you all had that conversation? After watching what went down with both my grandparents' land, I didn't want to see that happen again. It breaks my heart. Yeah, I understand. I've had the same conversations because I'm conscious. I wanted to know, what do I do? I went and I asked my parent, and I said, what is it going to look like when you pass? I'm not wishing that for you, but I have no clue what to do, where to go. And basically, I got told an answer that wasn't too pleasant, but pleasant to me. But also, it made me think, if we had Torah governing these decisions, it would help keep things in order and be fair. They don't really have much to leave behind besides debt. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Some may have a house, some may have, something like that, potentially can be sold or lived in. Those things help. So I'll leave this question up here. So heirs property is land passed down without clear title, often because there was no will. That can block loans, disaster aid, timber income, farming use, repairs, and development on our own terms. It can also open doors to forced sales and speculator pressure. This is where we must stop separating scripture from paperwork. Torah is lawful order. Inheritance in scripture was not left to feelings, assumptions, or a handshake. It was named, it was recorded, it was guarded. So the USDA Forest Service research estimated more than 1.6 million acres of heirs property valued around 6.6 billion in Black Belt counties. And you said Acres Home was one of the largest Black communities in the U.S. It was created to be a place where Black families could buy land to build on themselves, which is why you see so many vacant lots and unfinished homes there. And it's probably, if we don't invest in these areas, it's only a matter of time before they gentrify. So ProPublica has reported that more than a third of Southern Black owned land may be heirs property. So there's a third of land out there. Do tell. There's a third of land out there that is Black owned land property. So I want to charge all of you here to let's do some research, right? And let's look into, do we have anything in heirs that is left to us that we can link to ourselves? And how do we do it? Right? And how do we do it? I'm not saying that as though that's going to be easy, but it is something very rich in nature. It has a rich reward. So the Gullah Geechee land battles show this is not only historic, it is also happening through unclear titles, taxes, development pressure, and predatory practices. So the lesson is simple. If the land is not ordered, it is vulnerable. If the records are not gathered, they are vulnerable. If the heirs are not named, they are vulnerable. If one person can sell what generations were supposed to hold, then the house needs lawful order before death forces confusion. So now the data shows the afterlife of this. One child begins life with down payment help, family property, business support, emergency backup, or debt-free education. Another begins with bills, no cushion, family crisis, and no property to leverage. Just work harder is too shallow when the starting lines are this far apart. One child is born into a cushion, another is born into catch up. So the Federal Reserve 2022 SCF, typical white family wealth was about 6 times typical Black family wealth. So Brianna says, and now investors coming in and buying up this land from the descendants, and the people don't understand the value or the history. They do not understand the value or the history. And that is the reason. And we stay distracted by all of the BS. We stay distracted by the people, the jesters that they give us in entertainment, right? For the Black community, which I've highlighted before, we are a people that relies on our entertainers to be our leaders. That's crazy. They're entertainers. They what makes them a credible source. So Richmond Fed says Black individuals were much less likely than white individuals to receive inheritance or major family gifts. Even when they received transfers, the average amounts were smaller. So the gap is the compound result of identity stripped, land loss, legal order absent, and household fracture. Now, I want you all to get something here. The immovable part that is constant throughout all of it is identity and the body of knowledge that comes with the identity, right? Now we must bring into the house blended families are not the enemy. Disorder is the enemy. So divorce, remarriage, stepchildren, half siblings, and children from prior unions create real inheritance questions. If parents do not order the inheritance clearly, property can be redirected by emotions of the new household, beneficiary forms, probate defaults, attorney fees, and family conflict. Torah already speaks to this in Deuteronomy 25, 15, and 17. It says a man cannot take the birthright from the firstborn son of the less favored wife and give it to the son of the favored wife. The principle is clear. Inheritance cannot be redirected by emotion, favoritism, new romance, or household politics. Number 27 shows the daughter of Zelophehad Fighting for inheritance of their father's name is not erased. And Numbers 36 shows that marriage can redirect inheritance if lawful order is not established. Torah already understood this. A new marriage should not erase old children. So also with a new marriage, a new marriage can cause that inheritance to leave the cycle of the family, right? But even more so, it can do it on an even larger scale if that person that they remarried is not of your nationality. If they are Caucasian, if they are Chinese, then that dollar, that inheritance does not circulate. It's going to leave the actual people that it belongs to, and it's going to leave that community. And that's one shift that is never going to be shifted back. It's going to shift and it's going to stay gone. So Brianna says, and the big joke is they're selling this narrative now about the dangers of home ownership and discouraging it while buying up the same land they're saying isn't worth it and leasing it back to them. Absolutely. It's a cold game. And that's why we have to be anchored, right? We shouldn't be tied to the narrative of what they sell us because their track record is not the most trustworthy. So looking at this, and can you all relate to this? Somebody in a family got remarried, and then that inheritance that they had is gone. They take it, right? Can you relate to that? Have you experienced that? So the new spouse can become gatekeeper after death. Wow, that was a drop moment right there. Absolutely. And we talked about a few things. Which one are you talking about? Because I know it's a little delay, and I kind of keep moving. Let us know which point you're highlighting. So let me know if y'all have experienced inheritance changing hand because of marriage. Beneficiaries can be changed quietly. Children from the first relationship can be emotionally pushed out. Property can be retitled into joint ownership and change control after death. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That is definitely. I gotta get them bombs like Zion I got. Property can be retitled into joint ownership and change control after death. Divorce can consume the estate before inheritance exists, and the parents may rely on feelings instead of written instruction. I know they will do right is not estate planning. Some children do not lose inheritance because their parents had nothing. They lose it because their parents started over and never lawfully carried them forward. If a father or a mother does not order the inheritance while alive, the children may be forced to fight for memory, money, land, and dignity after death. So let's look at a few points here. We have recovery identity. Teach the children who they are, what happened to the people, and what the scriptures require of them. That's number one. Number two, gather your records, your deeds, your tax records, birth and death records, wills, court orders, land history, business documents, and family photographs. Number three, order the estate, wills, trust where appropriate, beneficiary forms, payable on death accounts. Here, and I'll put this in the thing. Nobody's gonna remember all this. So let me put these in the chat. You're gonna take these notes, for yourself because they are to help. So number one, recover identity. Teach the children who they are, what happened to the people, and what scripture requires of them. Number two, gather records, deeds, tax records, birth and death records, wills, court orders, land history, business documents, and family photographs. Number three, order the estate, wills, trusts where appropriate, beneficiaries forms, payable on death accounts, transfer on death deeds, and power of attorney. Number four, protect land, clear title, pay taxes, organize heirs, resolve fractional ownership, and resist partition cell vulnerability. Number 5, protect children from household erasure, children from prior unions must be named, remembered, and provided for clearly in writing. Number 6, build businesses with systems, accounts, contracts, customer lists, operating procedures, insurance, and succession plans. And number 7, train heirs before transfer. Scripture, discipline, work ethic, money management, land stewardship, conflict resolution, and lawful order. Wisdom before the wealth. So we cannot rebuild inheritance with money alone. We need name, memory, land law, household order, and children trained to carry what elders suffered to preserve. The curse made us a byword and a proverb, but obedience requires us to recover the name. That's first. Gather the records, protect the land, order the household, teach the children, and leave something stronger than survival. So what Rosewood shows us, which we saw before, shows us what happens when land is violently interrupted. East St. Louis shows us what happens when the path to wages is attacked. And Tulsa shows us what happens when prosperity itself is treated as a threat. Blended families show us what happens when the house starts over without lawful order. The curse is starting over every generation. The repair is becoming a people of memory, order, and inheritance again. So Deuteronomy, we went through the scriptures to show those things, right? And I want to bring it back full circle, and I want to end on just highlighting a few of these, right? Deuteronomy 28:16 says, "Curse shall thou be in the city, and curse shall thou be in the field." That means the curse touches both places. It touches the city, business districts, homes, schools, banks, neighborhoods, wages, factories, and it touches the fields, farms, land, crops, rural property, and family acreage. So when we talk about Tulsa, we are talking about cursed in the city. When we talk about East St. Louis, we are talking about cursed in the city and cursed in labor. When we talk about Rosewood and black farmland laws, we're talking about the city and field together. And also, too, we have slavery, right? What they did when they were in chains. Deuteronomy 28:17 says, "Curse shall be the basket in thy store." The basket is what feeds you today. Store is what you hold for tomorrow. So the curse touches both survival and savings. It touches what we eat now and what we plan to leave later. Deuteronomy 28:18 says, "The fruit of the body and the fruit of the land would be touched." That is the children and land. That is descendants and property. That is why it is not only economic, this is generational. Deuteronomy 28:30 says, "Thou shalt build a house and thou shalt not dwell therein." Rosewood says, amen to that. And Tulsa says, amen to that. And every family that built, fled, and never returned says, amen to that. Deuteronomy 28:33, "The fruit of the land and all thy labor shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up." That is labor without secure inheritance. That is building while another people eats the fruit. Deuteronomy 28:34 says, "The people would be mad for the sight of their eyes." That is talking about trauma. That is elders seeing homes burned and bodies in the street, family land taken and children scattered, and then trying to live what the eyes saw. Deuteronomy 28:37 says, "We would become a byword and a proverb." A byword is a people call you after your true name is buried. That is why identity recovery is not optional. And we've gone through so many name changes, right? Black, African American, Negro, and all of the other words, derogatory terms that we have been called by. Deuteronomy 28:43 and 44 says, "The stranger rises up very high and lends to us while we borrow." So that is debt domination. That is borrower under the lender. That is economic condition that keeps the next generation starting from below. Deuteronomy 28:64 says, "We will be scattered among all people." Deuteronomy 28:68 says ships. So the scattering did not only move bodies, it scattered names, records, land memory, fathers, households, and inheritance. That is why Rosewood, East St. Louis, Tulsa, heirs property, and the inheritance gap are not disconnected events. They are covenant witnesses. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this has been, let's put this back up here. I hope this has been enlightening to you all. I hope this has helped. Please like, share this as well. And thank you so much for tuning in. Praise the Most High. Shalom.